The call came exactly 2 months after my best friend's funeral. His lawyer said he'd left me something. Strict orders to open it alone. I expected memories, not a warning. I pressed play, froze mid-breath, and heard words that flipped my world upside down. The people I trusted most were planning my death, and the final instruction made my blood run cold. Before I tell you how it all began, do me a small favor. Stay with me till the end, and if stories like this matter to you, make sure you follow the channel, and let me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you think. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting at the long oak desk of my study, sorting through old financial statements I no longer really needed. Retirement had given me time. Too much time, some days, and I filled it with small, harmless tasks just to keep my thoughts from wandering into darker places. Outside, early autumn sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the room in gold and shadow. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Ever since grief had taken up residence. "Evan Hale?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Daniel Brooks, legal counsel for John Allen." My hand tightened around the phone. John. Even hearing his name still felt like someone pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. He had been gone for 2 months. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. Diagnosed and gone in 6 weeks. 43 years of friendship ended in less time than it takes most people to plan a vacation. "I need you to come to my office today," Daniel said. His tone was careful, deliberate. "John left something for you, with instructions. Very specific instructions." "What kind of something?" I asked. "A package." He made me promise I wouldn't release it until today. Exactly 60 days after his death. That detail alone made my stomach tighten. John had never done anything without a reason. "I'll be there," I said. The drive downtown felt longer than it should have. Traffic lights blurred together. Memories intruded without permission. John and I had met freshman year of college. 2 broke kids sharing cheap beer and big ideas. We built a tech company from nothing but student loans and stubborn belief. Sold it decades later for more money than either of us had ever imagined as kids. We were brothers in every way that mattered, even if blood didn't agree. After I sold my shares and stepped away, John stayed in the game. I retired early, traveled, tried to enjoy life. Then my first wife, Laura, died suddenly. An aneurysm, no warning. I unraveled quietly after that. The kind of unraveling no one notices because you still show up, still smile, still function. That was when Lena entered my life. She was younger, attentive, kind in ways that felt like rescue. She listened. She filled the silence. Her son, Ryan, came with her, quiet, watchful, always polite. John had been the only one who seemed uneasy, but I chalked it up to protectiveness. John had always been cautious where I was concerned. Now John was gone. Daniel Brooks' office overlooked the river. He greeted me with a firm handshake and didn't bother with small talk. Instead, he walked straight to a wall safe, spun the dial, and removed a sealed envelope. Inside was a single USB drive. He recorded this 3 weeks before he passed. Daniel said. He was lucid, clear, and very insistent. Insistent about what? That you watch it alone. Then call me. I nodded, took the envelope, and left without asking anything else. At home, the driveway was empty. Lena was out with friends. Ryan was supposedly at his apartment near campus, though I paid the rent and rarely saw him attend class. The house felt hollow, like it always did when I was alone, but this time, the quiet carried weight. I locked myself in my study and slid the USB into my laptop. John's face filled the screen. He looked thinner than I remembered. Skin drawn tight over sharp cheekbones, oxygen tubing looped beneath his nose. But his eyes, those were unmistakably John. Sharp, focused, alive. "Tom," he said softly. Only he ever used that nickname anymore. "If you're seeing this, then I'm gone. And I need you to listen to me carefully. I need you to trust me one more time, like you did when we bet everything on a company nobody believed in." He paused to catch his breath. "Your wife and her son are planning to kill you." I laughed out loud at first. A short, startled sound. Reflexive, uncontrolled. Then I froze, Realizing John wasn't smiling, he wasn't joking, I paused the video, stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. This was grief talking, I told myself. Medication. Hallucination. John had been heavily medicated at the end. Then I pressed play. I know what you're thinking, John continued. That I was doped up. That this is paranoia. I wish it were. But I spent my last good weeks asking Linda's nephew, remember Jake, to look into some things that didn't sit right with me. John swallowed hard. What he found is all on this drive. Documents, audio, financial records, everything. My hand began to shake. Lena married you for your money, Tom. That's it. And she and her son have done this before. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. John explained, carefully, methodically, previous husbands, sudden deaths, insurance changes, money trails, offshore accounts, forged documents, audio recordings where Ryan talked too freely, assuming no one was listening. They're poisoning you slowly, John said quietly. Digitalis. Enough to look like heart failure. It's supposed to happen next month. The video ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Every memory replayed itself under a new, brutal light. Lena insisting I take supplements, encouraging me to update my will, consolidating accounts for convenience. The way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't confront her. John had warned me not to. Instead, I began to play my role. That night, I smiled at dinner. I swallowed fake vitamins. I complained about being tired. I let her fuss over me. Inside, every instinct screamed, but I stayed calm. Because John was right, and the evidence on that drive suggested he was. Then my survival depended on one thing above all else. They could never know that I knew. And that was only the beginning. I slept poorly that night, drifting in and out of shallow dreams where John kept trying to tell me something, but his voice was muffled, like he was speaking through water. Every time I woke, my heart was racing, and for a split second I forgot why, until I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on my chest again. Morning came as it always did. Lena moved through the kitchen humming softly, setting a mug of coffee in front of me, the picture of care and routine. She kissed my cheek, asked how I'd slept, her eyes scanning my face not with affection, but assessment. I wondered how long she'd been doing that, measuring me, checking for weakness, calculating. Rough night, I said, forcing a yawn. Must be the stress. She frowned with practiced concern. You've been pushing yourself too hard. You really need to listen to your body, Evan. She slid the familiar pill bottle across the counter. Did you take your supplements? Yes, I lied smoothly. They upset my stomach a bit, though. Her expression flickered. Just for a second, then reset. That's normal at first. It means they're working. I nodded, took a sip of coffee, and kept my eyes down so she wouldn't see the anger burning behind them. As soon as she left for her morning yoga class, I locked myself in the study again and reopened the USB drive. This time, I went through everything slowly, methodically, like the businessman I'd once been. John hadn't exaggerated. Jake Rodriguez's investigation was airtight. There were spreadsheets tracing money moved in small, forgettable amounts from my accounts to shell companies overseas. There were scanned insurance applications with my forged signature, disturbingly accurate. There were photographs of Lena meeting a man I didn't recognize in parking lots and cafes, time-stamped, annotated. And there were audio files. I clicked one. Ryan's voice filled the room, lazy and smug. Once he's gone, we're set. The house alone is worth millions. Mom says we disappear for a while. New names, new accounts. Another file. Lena's voice this time, calm and chilling. You can't rush this. Men his age die all the time. The longer it takes, the cleaner it looks. I closed my eyes. This wasn't greed. This was calculation. By noon, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. John had trusted someone enough to investigate, and I needed to trust that same person now. I called the number Daniel Brooks had given me. Jake arrived that evening. He didn't look like the private investigators from movies. No trench coat, no swagger. He was lean, alert, eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interrupting as I told him what I'd seen, what I feared, what I wanted. I don't want them scared off. I finished. I want proof so solid they can't talk their way out of it. Jake nodded slowly. Then you did the right thing by not reacting. First thing, we test the pills. He took the bag I'd hidden in my desk drawer. If it's digitalis like they said, that's attempted murder. Already serious. And after that, he said quietly, we let them think the plan is working. The next week was the hardest performance of my life. I became weaker in front of them, complained about dizziness, let Lena schedule unnecessary doctor appointments, let Ryan hover in the background, pretending concern. Every smile felt like poison. Every touch made my skin crawl. Behind the scenes, Jake worked relentlessly. The pills came back positive. The lab results alone could put Lena away. But Jake wanted more. We need the hired muscle, he said. Whoever's supposed to make this look like an accident. He was right. Without that final piece, they could claim it was all talk, all fantasy. So we set a trap. I told Lena I was planning a weekend trip to visit my daughter. She lit up too quickly, encouraged me to stay longer, to rest. Ryan suddenly showed up more often, overly attentive, asking about my travel plans. Friday morning, I packed my suitcase, kissed Lena goodbye, and drove to the airport. I never boarded a plane. Instead, I checked into a hotel 10 miles away, where Jake and his team had already set up surveillance feed from my house. Cameras, microphones, every room. By early afternoon, the first domino fell. A man entered my home. Large, confident, armed. Jake leaned forward, eyes narrowed. That's him. I watched on the screen as Lena greeted the stranger like an old acquaintance. She handed him an envelope, cash, showed him the layout of my house, my bedroom, my habits. Tomorrow night, she said calmly. He'll be back from his trip, tired, easy. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They weren't just planning my death. They were rehearsing it. Jake placed a steady hand on my shoulder. We've got them. I nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, because tomorrow night they thought I'd be alone, and that mistake was going to cost them everything. The longest night of my life began with a lie I told easily and hated myself for believing I could keep telling. Lena thought I was 10 hours away, sipping coffee with my daughter, catching up on a life she pretended to support. In reality, I was lying on a stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own house breathe through a web of hidden microphones. Jake sat at the small desk near the window, a bank of screens glowing blue and white in the dim room. Each one showed a different angle of my home. The front entry, the back door, the hallway outside my bedroom, the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast with a woman who had calmly planned my death. Every creak, every shift of air came through our headsets amplified and intimate. Breathe, Jake said quietly. Tonight is about watching, not acting. I nodded, though my hands trembled. I can't believe how normal she sounded. That's the most dangerous kind, he replied. People who can talk about killing the same way they talk about groceries. We watched as the hours passed. Lena moved through the house with purpose. She cleaned. She showered. She changed clothes twice. Not nervous, focused. At 6:30, she left for her book club dinner, waving cheerfully at the cameras she didn't know existed. Her alibi, carefully cultivated. At 8:40, Ryan appeared. He paced, checked his phone repeatedly. At 9, he left, dressed for a party, smiling at his reflection in the hallway mirror. Another alibi secured. By 9:30, the house was empty. Jake's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked at me. Police are in position. Plain clothes. Unmarked vehicles. They'll move when we give the signal. And me? You go home, he said, like nothing's wrong. My stomach lurched. You're sure? They won't act if you're not there. The plan depends on you being tired, vulnerable, asleep. I swallowed hard. Then let's finish it. The drive back felt unreal. Every red light felt like a warning. Every passing car felt like a witness. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked exactly the same as it had every other night. Warm lights glowing, familiar shape against the dark. It felt like walking into a crime scene that hadn't happened yet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of the tea Lena had brewed for me earlier. I poured it straight into the plant by the window, then changed into pajamas, and laid down in bed, fully clothed beneath the covers, heart hammering. Jake's voice murmured through the tiny earpiece tucked behind my ear. "He's nearby. Stay still." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then I heard it, the soft click of the back door. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Someone moving through my house with the confidence of a man who'd already been paid. The door to my bedroom creaked open. I kept my eyes closed, breathing slow and shallow, every instinct screaming to run. I felt the weight of a presence near the bed, smelled sweat and metal. A voice whispered my name, and then the lights exploded on. "Police! Don't move!" Chaos erupted. Shouting. The sound of a body hitting the floor. Handcuffs snapping closed. I sat up, shaking, as officers flooded the room. The man, Torres, as Jake later confirmed, stared at me with flat, unreadable eyes as they dragged him away. It was over, or so I thought. Lena arrived 20 minutes later. She stepped out her car, heels clicking on the driveway, face arranged into confusion that shattered the moment she saw me standing in the living room, alive. Shock flashed first, then calculation, then fear. "What is this?" she demanded. "What's going on?" Ryan arrived soon after, already crying, already unraveling. When the recordings played, when Lena heard her own voice discussing poison and payments, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She went quiet. The weeks that followed blurred together. Interrogations, charges, headlines. Lena was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Ryan with the same. Torres took a deal. At trial, John's video played in court. His warning. His last act of loyalty. Lena never looked at me when the verdict was read. Life without parole. I sold the house. I couldn't live where my death had been planned. I built something new instead. A foundation in John's name, helping others who've been targeted the way I had. Sometimes I still watch that video. Not the warning, but the end. "Live," John had said. "That's an order." So I did. And every day I wake up, I remember. The truth came from a friend who refused to let death be the end of his protection. The days after the arrest moved strangely, like time had lost its edges. I stayed in a hotel under police recommendation, not because Lena or Ryan could reach me anymore, but because the house itself felt contaminated. Every corner held echoes. Her voice in the kitchen, Ryan's footsteps on the stairs, the place where a stranger had stood in the dark, waiting for my heart to stop. Detective Morrison checked in daily. She was efficient, direct, the kind of person who didn't waste words on comfort, but somehow made you feel steadier just by being present. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," she told me during one of our meetings. "Most people panic. You didn't. That saved your life." I nodded, though inside I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow. Shock doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it settles quietly and refuses to leave. Jake remained close. He coordinated with prosecutors, organized evidence, walked me through what would happen next. The recordings, the lab results, the financial trails, everything lined up too neatly for any defense to dismantle. Lena refused to speak. Ryan talked too much. He cried during questioning, blamed his mother, blamed fear, blamed money. He claimed he never thought it would really happen, that it was all talk until it wasn't. The investigators listened, unmoved. Intent didn't disappear just because regret showed up late. The media caught the story within days. Wealthy retiree targeted by family plot. My name circulated in headlines I never wanted to read. Friends called. Distant relatives resurfaced. Sympathy poured in from people who had barely known me before. None of it mattered as much as one thing. John. I kept thinking about his last weeks. How much pain he must have been in. How he'd spent that time not resting, not saying goodbye, but protecting me. He could have let it go. He could have chosen peace. Instead, he chose action. I visited Linda a week later. She was in the garden, trimming roses John had planted years ago. She looked older than her 70 years, Grief carved gently into her posture. When she saw me, she set the shears aside and opened her arms. He told me, she said quietly before I could speak. Not everything, just that he was worried about you. I swallowed hard. He saved my life. She nodded. That sounded like him. We sat in silence for a long time, sunlight warming the space between us. Finally, she said, he was angry that he wouldn't be here to see the end of it, but he was satisfied knowing you'd be safe. The trial came faster than I expected. Lena's defense tried to paint her as a misunderstood wife, Ryan as a confused young man led astray. But the evidence spoke louder than any performance. The jury heard her voice discussing poison like a recipe. They saw the forged signatures. They listened to John's warning. When the verdict was read, Lena showed no emotion. Ryan collapsed into sobs. Torres stared straight ahead. Life sentences. Decades. Finality. Afterward, I walked out courthouse alone. Cameras flashed. Questions shouted. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking, breathing air that felt new somehow. Earned. I sold the house within the month. Gave away what I didn't need. Donated what felt tainted. With Jake's help, I created the John Allen Trust, a foundation focused on protecting people targeted by financial predators, especially seniors and widowers like me. The work gave shape to the days again. We funded investigations, paid legal fees, stopped scams before they became tragedies. Every case felt like a conversation with John that hadn't ended, just changed form. Sometimes, late at night, I still replay that USB video. Not the warning, but the last seconds where John smiled weakly and said, "We had a good run, didn't we?" We did, and I'm still running. Because he made sure I could. The month that followed should have felt like relief. But relief is quieter than people imagine. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or triumph. It comes in fragments. Sleeping through the night without jolting awake. Drinking coffee without wondering what's been added to it. Walking into a room without replaying how someone once planned to end your life there. I moved into a temporary rental on the other side of the city. A modest place with white walls and unfamiliar creaks. I wanted nothing that reminded me of the old house. Familiarity had become dangerous. Neutral felt safer. Detective Morrison closed the case officially, but she didn't disappear. She checked in once a month, partly professional, partly human. Most people struggle after, she said once. Your brain takes time to understand that the threat is actually gone. She was right. Even with Lena behind bars and Ryan sentenced, my body didn't believe it immediately. I flinched at sudden noises. I scanned exits in restaurants. I trusted slowly, cautiously, like someone relearning how to walk after a fall. The foundation work accelerated faster than I expected. Word spread quickly once the story became public. Emails came in from people across the country. Widowers whose new partners had drained accounts. Elderly parents coerced into signing documents they didn't understand. Adult children discovering too late that someone had been quietly dismantling a life they loved. Each message felt heavier than the last. I hired a small team, legal analysts, investigators, counselors. Jake oversaw security and vetting. He insisted on background checks for everyone, no exceptions. I didn't argue. I'd learned the cost of blind trust. One afternoon, a woman named Marlene sat across from me in our small conference room. She was 74, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes darting like she expected someone to burst in and stop her from speaking. My fiancé says I'm confused, she whispered, that I forget things. He's trying to get me evaluated. My chest tightened. We intervened. Quietly, legally. Within weeks, her accounts were secured, her documents reviewed. The evaluation found nothing wrong with her cognition. When she hugged me goodbye, she cried into my shoulder and said, "You saved me." I shook my head. John did. At night, when the building emptied and the lights dimmed, I sometimes sat alone in my office, staring at the framed photo of John I kept on my desk. It was from years ago, both of us younger, arms slung over each other's shoulders, laughing at something only we understood. "You'd like this," I told the empty room. "You always said money should mean something." Grief shifted shape during those months. It stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like weight. Something I carried rather than something that hurt constantly. Some days it was heavier. Some days it barely registered. But it was always there. Ryan tried to contact me once. A letter arrived at the foundation office, forwarded after security screening. It was handwritten, messy. Words slanted as if he'd written in a hurry. He said he was sorry, that he'd been manipulated, that prison had given him time to think, that he hoped I could forgive him someday. I read it once. Then I locked it in a drawer. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip because someone asks. It's a process, and sometimes it never completes. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. Lena never reached out. Through Jake, I learned that other investigations had reopened. Old deaths, old insurance changes, patterns too similar to ignore. She would likely never see freedom again, not because of me alone, but because truth has a way of stacking up when someone finally starts looking. On the anniversary of John's death, I visited his grave alone. The cemetery was quiet, autumn leaves carpeting the ground in red and gold. I sat on the bench nearby, hands clasped, breathing in cool air that smelled of earth and pine. I kept the promise, I said softly. I lived. I told him about the foundation, about Marlene, about the dozens of people we'd helped, about how his last act had multiplied into something bigger than either of us could have planned. I wish you were here to see it, I added, but I think you knew. The wind moved through the trees, leaves rustling like distant applause. For a moment, it almost felt like an answer. When I stood to leave, I felt steadier than I had in a long time. Not healed, not untouched, but grounded and ready for whatever came next. By the time the second year rolled around, my life had settled into something resembling rhythm again. Not the old one, not the careless ease I'd once had, but a steadier, harder-earned balance. The foundation had moved out of borrowed office space into its own building, modest but purposeful. No glass towers, no flashy signage. Just a clean, quiet place where people could walk in scared and leave protected. I learned quickly that helping others came with its own weight. Every story carried echoes of my own. Every betrayal wore a different face, but shared the same hunger. I listened to them all. Widowers, retirees, parents whose children had turned into strangers with calculators for hearts. Some days, after the last meeting ended and the doors were locked, I sat alone in my office and felt the exhaustion settle into my bones. Jake noticed before I said anything. "You're burning yourself down," he said one evening, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "John didn't save you so you could disappear into this." "I'm fine," I replied automatically. He raised an eyebrow. "That's a lie you tell well, but I've heard better." I sighed and leaned back in my chair. I don't know how to stop. Every case feels urgent. Every delay feels like someone else getting hurt. "That's not on you," he said. "You built something strong. Let it work." He was right. Of course. I started delegating more, trusting the team I'd chosen carefully. It wasn't easy. Trust never came easily anymore. But control isn't protection, it's isolation. I was learning that the hard way. That winter, a case crossed my desk that stopped me cold. A man named Harold Quinn, 72, recently remarried. His adult daughter had contacted us anonymously, worried her father was being manipulated. The new wife controlled his phone, his mail, his appointments. She convinced him his daughter was trying to steal from him. I read the file twice before agreeing to meet him. Harold arrived with his wife. She didn't leave his side, answered questions meant for him, touched his arm every time he hesitated. I recognized the pattern immediately. After the meeting, I asked to speak with Harold alone. His wife smiled tightly and said, "He gets confused." I smiled back just as tightly. "Then we'll keep it simple." What followed took months. Medical evaluations, financial audits, quiet legal maneuvers. In the end, the truth came out. The wife vanished the moment her access to money was cut off. When Harold hugged his daughter in our lobby, sobbing apologies he didn't fully understand yet, something inside me loosened. That night, I went home and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Healing, I realized, wasn't linear. It came in waves, some gentle, some violent. Some days I felt strong, purposeful. Other days I felt, tired, acutely aware of how close I'd come in not being here at all. On my 66th birthday, my daughter surprised me. She flew in unannounced. Standing on my doorstep with a cake from a bakery I loved and a smile that reached her eyes. We sat at the kitchen table late into the night, talking about her work, her kids, the small, ordinary things I'd nearly lost. "You're different," she said at one point. "Better or worse?" I asked. "Real," she replied. That might have been the best gift she could have given me. Ryan's appeal was denied that spring. I felt nothing. No relief. No satisfaction. Just distance. His choices had sealed his path long before I understood it. That wasn't something I could fix. Lena's name surfaced again in the news a few months later. Investigators in 2 other states had filed charges related to her former husbands. Patterns. Money trails. Familiar language in old emails. Predators don't stop until someone stops them. John had stopped her once. The rest of the system was catching up. I visited Linda again that summer. We sat on her porch, iced tea sweating in our hands, cicadas humming in the heat. "He would be proud of you," she said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "I hope so," I replied. She smiled. "I know so. He always said you were the one who'd carry things forward." As I drove home that evening, windows down, warm air rushing in, I felt something unexpected settle over me. Peace, not the absence of pain, not forgetting what happened, but acceptance. I had survived. I had chosen not just to live, but to matter, to turn someone else's final act of loyalty into a living promise. And for the first time since John died, I didn't feel like I was borrowing time anymore. It felt like it was finally mine. The 3rd year after everything unraveled began quietly, almost deceptively so. No sirens, no court dates circled in red on my calendar, no late-night calls from detectives or lawyers. Just mornings with coffee, paperwork that felt purposeful instead of urgent, and a foundation that no longer felt fragile. That was when the past decided it wasn't finished with me. It started with a letter. No return address. Cream-colored envelope. My name typed, not handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You think you won. You didn't." That was it. No signature. No explanation. I sat at my desk for a long time staring at the words. Old fear stirred. Not sharp, not paralyzing, but familiar. The kind that reminded you survival was never permanent. Only maintained. I called Jake. "You're not overreacting," he said after I read it to him. "You're also not panicking. That's good. We'll treat it like what it is, a signal. A signal from who? Doesn't matter yet. What matters is whether it's noise or intent." Within hours, security tightened. Cameras checked. Entry logs reviewed. Nothing unusual. No attempted access. No digital breaches. Just a letter. 2 days later, another arrived. John should have minded his own business. That one hit harder. I didn't need Jake to tell me this wasn't coincidence anymore. Detective Morrison was looped in. Though officially retired from my case, she didn't hesitate to step back in. "Lena's still his friends," she said bluntly during our call. "Not good ones, but loyal in the way criminals can be. Prison doesn't end influence. It just changes how it moves." "Do you think this is real?" I asked. "I think someone wants you unsettled. Whether they plan to act or just enjoy the idea. That's what we'll find out." The foundation staff didn't know. I kept it that way. Fear spreads faster than truth if you let it. Weeks passed. Then months. The letters stopped. Life resumed its quieter rhythm. New cases came in. Some heartbreaking. Some hopeful. One in particular stayed with me. A woman named Elise Carter, 68, recently widowed. Her late husband's brother had stepped in to help with finances. Within 6 months, her savings were gone, her house nearly transferred. When she sat across from me in the conference room, hands shaking around a paper cup of water, she said, "I thought I was being dramatic. I thought maybe I deserved it for being careless." I leaned forward and said something I'd said many times before, but never without meaning it. Being trusting isn't a flaw. It's something people exploit. We stopped the transfer, froze the accounts, filed charges. Elise cried when she realized she wasn't powerless. Those moments, that exact moment, were why the foundation existed. Late one evening, after staff had gone home, I stayed behind reviewing case notes. The building was quiet, too quiet. I heard the click, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft metallic sound near the back entrance. Every muscle in my body tightened. Jake's training kicked in before fear could. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I slowly reached under the desk and pressed the silent panic button we'd installed after the letters. Minutes stretched, then footsteps. Careful, measured. A shadow passed beneath the frosted glass of my office door. "Evan," a voice said softly. My name spoken like that, unhurried, familiar, was worse than shouting. "Open the door. We just want to talk." I recognized a voice from recordings I'd forced myself to memorize. Raymond Torres. He was supposed to be in prison for life. The door handle rattled gently. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued. "Not tonight. You're too valuable alive." Police sirens wailed in the distance, closer than they should have been unless Morrison had been right to stay close. Torres laughed quietly. "Guess this is my night." Footsteps retreated. A door slammed. By the time officers flooded the building, Torres was gone, but he'd left something behind. A phone. Cheap. Prepaid. No fingerprints. Except one thing. A voicemail saved as a draft. Lena's voice. "If he's still breathing, you didn't finish the job." The hunt reignited overnight. Torres had escaped during transfer weeks earlier. Information buried in a backlog no one thought to flag for me. He'd stayed hidden, waiting, watching. This time, he wasn't careful enough. 3 days later, he was caught crossing state lines with forged documents and a weapon in his trunk. During interrogation, he talked, not because he wanted to, because he was tired. Lena had promise and protection from inside. Connections, favors, all lies. She'd ordered the intimidation, not to kill me, yet, but to remind me she still existed. That illusion died in a concrete interrogation room. Lena lost every privilege she had left. Solitary confinement, communication restrictions, new charges added to her sentence. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. At John's grave that weekend, I told him everything. "They tried again," I said quietly, "and they failed. Again." The wind stirred the grass. A familiar calm settled in my chest. That night back home, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd picked up since nearly losing everything. Fear doesn't disappear. It just stops owning you. I closed the book, turned off the light, and slept without dreams. For the first time, I knew something with certainty. This story, my story, was no longer about surviving. It was about standing. By the 4th year, the danger had finally quieted. Not vanished, but muted, like a storm that had spent itself against rock. Torres was gone for good this time, transferred under conditions so strict his name stopped circulating even in the shadows. Lena disappeared into a system that no longer listened to her. No letters, no threats, no reminders. Silence returned. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept routines tight, varied routes, checked locks twice. Old instincts don't vanish just because the threat does. But slowly, almost without noticing, I began to breathe differently, deeper, longer, as if my body was finally convinced I would wake up again the next morning. The foundation grew beyond anything I'd imagined when it was just an idea scribbled on a yellow legal pad. We expanded into 3 states, partnered with hospitals, banks, senior centers, created a rapid response legal fund for cases that couldn't wait. We trained volunteers, retired auditors, former detectives, nurses, people who knew how predators thought because they'd seen the damage firsthand. One afternoon, during a quarterly review, someone asked me why I still took the first meeting with every new case personally. "You don't have to do that anymore," our director said gently. "We have staff." "I know," I replied, "but I need to." What I didn't say was that every first meeting grounded me. It reminded me where this all started. It kept me from turning pain into abstraction. That was how I met Samuel Ortega. 74. Former machinist. Widowed. His stepdaughter had moved in temporarily after his wife's death. 6 months later, his accounts were empty, his credit ruined, his name nearly signed off his own house. He sat across from me, hands calloused even in old age, eyes dull with shame. "I thought I was helping family," he said. "Didn't realize I was the one being taken apart." I told him the truth, the same way John would have. "You weren't taken apart," I said. "You were targeted." When Samuel got his house back, he brought us homemade empanadas every Friday for a month. It was his way of saying thank you. Those small moments mattered more than awards or headlines ever could. Not that the attention stopped. A documentary team reached out, then another, then a publisher. Everyone wanted the story: near-death, betrayal, justice, transformation. I declined most of them, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't want spectacle. Eventually, I agreed to one interview. Just one. They filmed it in my office. No reenactments. No dramatic music. Just me, a chair, and a camera. At the end, the interviewer asked, "If you could speak to the version of yourself before all this happened, what would you say?" I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, I'd tell him to trust his instincts sooner. And I'd tell him that being lonely doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But predators mistake humanity for permission. That clip went viral. Emails poured in. Messages from strangers. Men and women who recognized themselves in pieces of my story. Some thanked me. Some asked for help. Some just said, "I didn't know this could happen. Now I'm paying attention." That was enough. On the 5th anniversary of John's death, the foundation held its first annual lecture in his name. A small auditorium. No fanfare. Just people who cared. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces both young and old, and felt something tighten in my throat. John believed that protection was an act of love, I said. Not control. Not secrecy. Protection through truth. Through preparation. Through standing up when it's easier to look away. Afterward, Linda hugged me. "He'd be embarrassed by all this," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's how I know we did it right." That night, alone at home, I took out the USB drive. The technology was obsolete now. I'd had it copied, archived, secured in more ways than I could count. But I kept the original anyway. I watched John's message again. Not the warning, not the evidence. Just the end. Live, he'd said, "For both of us." I closed my laptop and sat there in the quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in response to something: danger, loss, duty. I was just living. The foundation would outlast me. That was the plan. I'd put safeguards in place. Boards. Oversight. No single point of failure. No chance of the mission to be twisted into something else. I'd learned that lesson too well. Some nights, I still thought about Lena, not with fear, not even anger, but curiosity. How someone could look at another human being and see only opportunity. How emptiness could wear a smile so convincingly. But then I'd think about Samuel, about Elise, about the hundreds of names in our files marked resolved. And the curiosity would fade, because the truth was simple. Evil doesn't need fascination. It needs resistance. And resistance, sustained long enough, becomes legacy. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I realized something else. John didn't just save my life. He changed its direction. And that was a gift I intended to keep honoring. Every day I was given to do so. The years didn't end with a bang. They ended the way real lives usually do, quietly, in moments so ordinary you almost miss their importance until later. By the 6th year, I'd stopped counting anniversaries the way I once had. Dates no longer felt like traps waiting to spring. They were just days again. Mornings arrived without dread. Nights ended without checking every shadow twice. The world had eased its grip on my pulse. And in return, I'd stopped holding my breath. The foundation was no longer my foundation. That mattered more than anything. A new executive director ran daily operations. The board included former judges, financial auditors, medical ethicists, and, most importantly, survivors. People who had once sat across from me trembling, now sat at tables making decisions that would protect thousands of others. Watching that happen felt like witnessing a relay race where the baton had been passed cleanly, without stumbling. That was how I knew it would survive me. I spent more time mentoring than leading, teaching staff how to read between lines, how to listen not just to what people said, but to what they avoided. Predators thrive in silence and politeness, so we train people to disrupt both. Sometimes when I spoke at seminars or community centers, someone would inevitably ask, "Do you ever regret trusting her?" The answer never changed. No, I'd say, I regret that someone chose to exploit trust, but I don't regret having it. Trust, I'd learned, wasn't a mistake. Blindness was. Silence was. Fear of being wrong was. Trust, paired with awareness, was strength. My daughter noticed the change before I did. "You don't talk like someone who escaped something anymore," she said one evening as we washed dishes side by side. "You talk like someone who built something." She was right. I'd rebuilt, not the house, not the life I'd had before, but something sturdier, something that didn't depend on illusion or comfort, something honest. Every so often, a letter would arrive at the foundation addressed to me personally, handwritten, careful. "Because of you, my mother is still alive. We stopped the transfer in time. You answered the phone when no one else would." I kept those letters in a drawer, not for pride, but for perspective. On difficult days, I'd open it and remind myself that fear once tried to end me, and failed. The last time I visited John's grave, the headstone had weathered slightly, moss at the edges, leaves caught near the base. I brushed them away and sat on the bench, hands folded, no speech prepared. I kept my promise. I said finally, "I lived." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and unremarkable. That felt right. I didn't ask questions anymore. Didn't wonder why things had happened the way they did. Those questions lead nowhere useful. What mattered was what followed. Lena's name surfaced once more, years later, buried deep in a legal bulletin. Another appeal denied. Another door closed. I felt nothing when I read it, not triumph, not relief, just distance. She no longer existed in my emotional landscape. That was the final victory. The man who had once planned my death had become irrelevant to my life. Time does that, if you let it. On my 70th birthday, the foundation staff surprised me with a small gathering. No speeches, no spotlight, just coffee, laughter, and a simple plaque mounted in the hallway. It read, "Protection is an act of love." I didn't need my name on it. That night, alone at home, I sat by the window and watched the city settle into darkness. Lights flickered on. Cars passed. Somewhere, someone laughed. Somewhere else, someone worried. Life moved forward in 1,000 unseen ways. I thought about the man I'd been before, the widower, the lonely retiree, the one who mistook attention for safety. I didn't judge him. I understood him now. We do the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time. What matters is whether we learn when the truth arrives. Before going to bed, I opened my journal one last time and wrote a single sentence. I was warned, I listened, and I chose to live. Then I closed the book. If you've stayed with me this far, let me leave you with this. Not as advice, but as a reminder. Pay attention to the quiet moments. Question the things that don't sit right. Love deeply, but protect wisely. And if you ever feel something is wrong, trust that instinct enough to act. Before I let you go, do one small thing for me. Support stories like this by staying connected, sharing where you're listening from, and standing up for awareness. Because sometimes the right story reaching the right person at the right moment doesn't just change a life. Sometimes it saves one.